Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Onboarding One of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm your host Andrew Jacobs. It seems onboarding has overtaken induction as the word we use to describe bringing someone into an organisation. I've been in learning and development for a while and I don't recall hearing it much before the early 2000s. It seems to have been taken on as we've started to use technology more and has leapt in the last few years as we manage different role types, doing different jobs in different places. We wanted to get an understanding of what it might mean and have two excellent guests to talk through this topic. Our first guest is Dolores Gaut. Dolores is a training specialist at Cognizant and has over 17 years of experience in training, facilitation, learner psychology and leadership development. This has been across several industries including event planning, marketing and higher education administration among many. Our second guest is Henrietta Klutz. Henrietta is an organisational psychologist and senior learning and development consultant. After spending years on both the vendor and corporate side of L&D, she started her own company, Gaut, in 2015. Gaut is so named since it's a statement towards an industry full of grey suits and, like Henrietta, is here to challenge. Recorded in April of this year, I strongly recommend taking time to listen through this whole episode. There is so much good stuff to uncover, especially in the last act. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Dolores and Henrietta talking about onboarding.
Hey Henriette, how are you doing today?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, my name is Dolores. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. Where are you based off?
I am based in Amersfoort, which I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of. Have
No, I
you?
haven't. No, I haven't.
It's in the middle of the Netherlands,
Okay.
about 30 minutes out of Amsterdam.
Nice. How long have you been there?
I actually don't come from here. My husband has lived here all his life, so I've moved here after I graduated from college. It's a nice city. It's big enough to be anonymous, and it's small enough to know people.
I love that. Yeah. We live in a suburb of Dallas called Richardson, and it's kind of the same way. It's big enough to be anonymous, but small enough to where you can find your own niche and everything, which actually kind of brings me to our topic today of onboarding. What's your experience with onboarding?
Yeah, well, I work as a consultant, as an external consultant. So I come in different organizations, and the question of onboarding always comes up, right? And the diversity of how organizations are doing this is very broad, and there is some things that are always challenging and the same. So it's a topic that, I hold close to my heart. What about you?
Oh gosh. Okay. So my experience with onboarding is tied very closely to my career, and I've played what I like to call musical careers. So I started off in higher education, and so I had a lot of experience in essentially doing like what's it called onboarding for students, essentially orientation. That's the word I'm looking for. Orientation. It's 8 a.m. in Dallas right now, and so I'm trying to get caffeinated here.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's good. This is a good way to kind of freshen up the brain cells and everything. So yeah. So I was involved in orientation a lot. I did many years of running student centers, and it was just basically a year after year after year of getting students oriented into the university. And it's something that I really, really enjoyed because I realized I had a hand in helping these students from all walks of life finding their place in the university. And then when I went into corporate, my first corporate role was actually in marketing, but we didn't have an orientation program, like a formal orientation program. And it's something that I really missed. And I got to talking to a few people in my circle who had moved on to other corporate jobs, and they mentioned learning and development was like a thing. And so I didn't realize that it was a thing. And so I started trying to get into that field and trying to figure out, well, how do I even reinvent myself as a learning and development professional? I did it through onboarding. So my very first learning and development position was dedicated exclusively to the onboarding experience. And it just kind of went from there. And me being the nerd that I am, I started reading all of these other things about how to make the onboarding experience better? What role does DEI have in this whole world? I actually found a really good book a few years ago from Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering. And that book just like really helped me to figure out like what's the kind of environment that I want to create in my onboarding.
Can I go back to, because I only know the corporate side of this, right? So if you go back to the educational side of it, and probably we'll move back to corporate in a second, I'm fascinated because the biggest challenge that I think organizations don't do well, that's why I'm asking about the educational bit, is making people comfortable when they come in, right? They're not concerned about the background of the organization or the fact that it started in some sort of attic or something like that. They don't want to know about that. They basically want to feel comfortable and sort of realize that they've made the right choice. How does that relate to orientation for students?
So it's funny you mentioned that because when students first come in, they're too cool for school, and so they don't really care to jump into any of the icebreakers or anything. And over the course of the next like 2 days or so, you kind of start peeling back their layers because they start feeling a little bit more comfortable either with their groups or their group leader, and they start to kind of see like, oh, okay, well, this is the environment for me, or nah, this isn't the environment for me, I'm going to go to another school. But either way, like an important part of the onboarding process is to figure out who you are in relation to the people who you share space with and how you're going to contribute to that space. Or if you decide I made a bad decision, I need to get out of here as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's two sides, right? There's the task side and the people side, if you call it that. So if you look at the people side of things, it's the culture, it's the feeling of, do I fit in here, and am I going to make any friends? It's the same for students, I guess, as it is in corporate. And there's always this balance. If you look at the task side of things, there's always this balance of, when do you give people more responsibility in order for them to get the feeling of they're contributing something without, pushing them onto the deep end. I think organizations really often don't get that balance right. Right. So they either give people too many responsibilities in the beginning and people get overloaded and they leave, or they let them just sit, and you come in, and the manager goes, take your time, we're not in a hurry, see if you can, just land, and then they get
Hmm.
nervous too because they're not contributing anything.
Right, right. Well, and I think the issue there is like the manager may be thinking, oh, well, I don't want to put too much pressure on them, but they're also not giving them a roadmap for, by end of week one, I should feel comfortable doing XYZ. I should at least have a little bit of knowledge about ABC, and then I'll just build on my knowledge there. And other companies, I think, go a little too gung ho, so to speak. They go too fast, too quickly,
Yeah.
because they basically put you in a room for 8 hours on your first day, and then expect you to be an expert in the whole company by the end of that first day. And like the human brain cannot handle that much information in 1 day. So
No, and from my experience, you also don't give them all the relevant information. So I remember Elliot Macy saying once, "What do you think people want to know when they get into a new job? They want to know, where's the bathroom and who can I go to for questions, right? They
yes.
don't want to know about the whole history and the CEO and how many kids he has and I don't know what. So you're sort of bombarding them with this whole irrelevant information, really."
Right, right. And I think another challenge we have is, depending on the size of your company and depending on how you do onboarding, it has to almost be like a one size fits all, right? You kind
Yeah.
of bring in, salesmen and programmers and customer service reps all in on the same day, which is great because I think it's important for those people to communicate with one another or network with one another and get out of that initial silo. But at the same time, that first onboarding day has to be a big picture type of experience, and then like as you go into your teams, that's where you get that minutia information or that team specific information.
Yeah, that is depending on the size of the organization. Organizations in general in the US obviously are bigger than in the Netherlands, right? So here, very often, we have a very big consortium of SMEs, really. So up to 100 or 500 is quite normal here, and then you have a couple of bigger corporates. But
Oh wow.
if you're more in this, yeah, that's completely different
Yeah,
than in
it's
the
really
US.
different.
I remember at my first US conference, and I was sitting in the room, and Elliot Macy it was his conference, and he asked the question, how many people are in a small organization, like below 10,000 employees? And I went, what? That's the baseline of what a small company is. So yeah, so we're a small company, which a country, which means that the companies are smaller too. So very often here, and I'm interested to hear your experience. You don't have a good size of a group to put them all in the room and do some sort of onboarding in the beginning. So very often they get started in their job. They're
Hmm.
either buddied by a coworker, and then they have these generic bits and pieces that they need to know about the organization or how other stuff works. But you sort of wait until you have a big enough group, and then you put them together. So, for example, you could be in your job for 3 months, and then after 3 months, you would get an overview of the other departments within the organization because then you have a group of 12 people together, for example.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is your experience different?
So, in my experience for where I've been in my careers here, yeah, it's pretty different. um, Usually, day one is where you get your biggest orientation experience or your biggest onboarding experience. You get put in a room, someone talks about the company's history, maybe what they do, maybe they talk a little bit about the company's values, and then send you off to lunch, or they send you off to network with other people in your cohort, maybe go off to your teams, and then come back to end the day. And that's probably um, the most in-depth experience that I've seen. I will say, like, the thing that universities do really well in terms of like orientation is they kind of almost hammer in the university's values into you, so that when you come out, you're bleeding school colors, right? Because you're just so ingratiated into the school culture, and that's something that I try to take with me sort of into corporate onboarding. Not saying that, like, if your values are integrity, then you need to know like what integrity means or whatever, but I'm saying, like, how does it get codified in your business systems? How does the company do business, keeping its mission and vision and value statements in mind? And how do you, as new person, how are you going to contribute to that in the capacity of your role? And so that's kind of what I try to do with like my onboarding, at least when I'm putting together programs.
I'm curious about that because if I'm new in a job and I hear these like big statements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Values and vision and mission statement, and I don't know anything about the company or anything specifically about what I'm going to do there,
Yeah.
am I able to answer that question that early on?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can. I don't think you should until you're in the business for maybe about 30, 60 days, because you don't really know what the company is about. You haven't
Exactly.
experienced the company, right? Like you haven't
Yeah.
worked in the job long enough to know how the company does things.
So why and this is not to be critical, but so why do you introduce them still on day one?
To the values.
Yeah. So if you're saying the same thing I am, right? So in a couple
Yeah.
of months after,
Yeah.
that's when they start, feeling the company and understanding it, and they can relate it to the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, and it's not just you.
Yeah.
Lots of organizations do this. Why do we still teach them that on day one?
If I had to answer that question, I'd say it's more of like this is our value. And so it's almost like a company. I wish it was this way. I don't know if it's this way, but I would like to think that it's this way. It's almost like a company is saying, these are our values. Now go off into the world and work. And then hopefully when we check in with you in a month, you'll see that our values are codified in our business systems.
Well, you have to, yeah, you have to sort of get them on board on the culture. So I think it's more or less a vehicle for getting them on board on the company culture, right?
Yes.
So yeah, maybe the way that we do it is still a bit old school, like telling them we're holding a presentation or something. I do get the idea behind it. Yeah. What I did at so we redesigned the onboarding program of a big supermarket chain in the Netherlands, and not for the people that are working in the supermarkets, but for their head office. And the problem we had there was exactly what we were just talking about. Like, so they didn't have enough people to have a cohort, but we did have to have some sort of program in place for them to at least know what was expected from them the first couple of weeks. And I sort of came in saying, I don't want to put someone behind a computer because they didn't have a group. So I don't want to put them behind a computer and then listen to the vision and the mission and the values and blah, blah, blah. How are they going to find it out? So basically what we did is we created this 6-week expedition with different kinds of challenges. And so one challenge was that they needed to interview 3 people in the head office about the company culture and say, listen, if these are the values, how do you think that that's incorporated in the work that you do? How do you feel that leadership is living these values and stuff like that? So we sort of did the same thing, but we had to make it differently because we didn't have a big enough group. And at the same time, I think it was becoming more alive for these people as well.
Yeah, I like that you kind of almost made it like a scavenger hunt, because
Yes.
you kind of put it on them to find out this information rather than you just saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, we did the same for the org chart, for example. So we said, we can give them this slide that shows the org chart, and then they go, yeah, all right. But we basically said, listen, it's all, and this, of course, you can do because it was a small head office. So we said, just walk around and make your own org chart, and then check at the end whether it was the same as the original one. So they had to just go into rooms and go, hi, which department are you? What do you guys do? So yeah, it was not for everyone, to be fair, because it's a whole gamified concept. And if you come in, you have this like financial controller role and you have to do a scavenger hunt in the head office. It's not necessarily for him or her. But yeah, but for most of the people, it was a sort of a different feel around it. I have another question though. So if you let go of the values and the competition around that, I remember one onboarding for a very big consultancy organization. It's a global consultancy, but I won't mention their name. And we started out with this big group of people, like 25 people in the room. And because I'm interested to see how you are solving this within your organization. And what they did was they told us everything we needed to know in a week. So imagine getting a system training in that first week as well, where in the like on day 4, you get an explanation of how to register your time for the projects that you were doing, right? But you register your time at the end of the month. So I came in, I got the explanation on day 3 or day 4, and then I had a month where I wasn't on any project, and then the second month I had to register my time. I didn't know anything anymore about what was being said on day 3, right?
Yeah.
How do you solve that in your onboarding programs?
Gosh, that's a really, really good question. So I think this is the disconnect between task and time to practice, right? Because if
Yes.
you're getting the instruction on day 4 and you're not going to need to use that instruction until day 29, why are you getting the instruction on day 4? Why not just get it on day 28 in preparation for day 29?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's for me, it's the old way of thinking about onboarding, right? So we're
Yeah.
giving everything to a person in the first couple of weeks, even if they're not necessarily using it. What would be very helpful is if there was some sort of performance support solution in place that by the time I actually had to do it, like on day 28, I would have, picked up the performance support solution and know how to do it. It was fine because now I had to go to a colleague and they're always willing to help. But that got me thinking about how onboarding is usually designed from a perspective of the organization wanting something from the people that come in, and they want to have the feeling that they've given them everything they need to be up to speed as soon as possible, but they're not actually thinking about the learning impact.
Yeah, and I think another layer of complexity added in is that I think a lot of companies don't have enough resources tied into onboarding because they just think onboarding is the first week, and then they don't have the resources to track someone's progress and someone's knowledge beyond that first week. I mean, there there are some companies out there that I'm sure say like, well, I just can't track someone who has been in a company or in this company for day 17, and I don't know how to see like what they know on day 17 versus day 28.
Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Well, so in my role in my current company, I'm not involved in the whole company's onboarding. I'm mostly dealing with my team's onboarding. So I do have the bandwidth to check in on people in
Hmm.
different times or different times of their tenure. But the thing that I really love about how my company does onboarding, they have an intranet page, and it just basically says like, this is your roadmap if you are onboarding into the company. On day one, you should learn these things. On by day 7, you should know these things. And it's
Hmm.
just basically a cheat sheet for
Yeah.
everyone to see. So like, if you come in and you're on day 9 and your coworker is on day 16, you can go to that same page and get the information that's relevant to you.
Yeah. And who do they discuss the outcomes with their manager? Do they look at it and go, hey, well, there's only 60% of this that I am able to do. How am I going to fix this? Or how does that work?
They're supposed to. They're supposed to talk to their managers about what their outcomes are, what their deliverables are, what they should know, what they need help with. In my experience of talking to other people who are onboarding within the company, for the most part, 9 times out of 10, the teams and their leaders, the supervisors, are very like, they're open books in terms of information, and they're always super helpful about getting people up and running, so to speak.
Hmm.
Um, so that's another reason why I love the company that I'm working for, is because I mean, one of the values that the company has is called creating conditions for everyone to thrive. And one of the things that I really love about them is like, they've really worked hard to codify that into their business practices.
Yeah. Is L&D doing anything to support the leadership in helping these people on board?
I'm trying to remember. So I mean, again, in my specific team, yes, our leaders hold um, leadership meetings throughout the month or so, to just kind of check in and see how people are doing. Leaders are encouraged to introduce their new people. They're encouraged to network with other recruiters within the teams. My area of expertise is like recruiting operations, so that's kind of where I'm doing onboarding, is onboarding the recruiters. um, so they do work hard to get that information shared. Sometimes the leaders can get a little siloed because they are interested more in talking about their people rather than listening about what other teams are doing for their people. But that's really the biggest problem that I'm working on right now, is allowing people to see like, where are you listening versus where are you just talking.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Yeah, so you get do you get groups of recruiters coming on board, or is it also one by one like in most organizations here?
It depends. Like, I've seen groups of 5 or 6, and then I've seen
Yeah.
like one person, and then one week it's like zero. It's just very cyclical.
Yeah. I think if I look at the onboarding programs, no matter the size of the group, that have been successful, have exactly worked with the objectives that you're just mentioning it.
Hmm.
And whenever I'm designing onboarding, I use behavioral objectives. So
Hmm.
basically, look at not only what do they need to know, but also what behavior are we expecting from them in their job or in their role. What's feasible to expect from them in week 3 or in week 4, and we sort of use it as behavioral checklist as well. And from that, we derive the actual program.
So I have a question for you about that. So in my role in my group, we are fully remote, so we don't go into an office. What's it like for you? Do you have people going into an office, or do you onboard remotely?
You mean in the Netherlands in general or myself?
Yourself.
Yeah, so currently I'm working for a smaller organization. They have about 1,200 employees, which is one of my biggest clients at the moment. And we have 2 very big units within the organization. So one unit is people that only get onboarded by the people that are in that business unit, because they have to get very specific knowledge and skills on the area that they're coming into. So very often they have no experience in the business unit. They come in and then they are educated by the people that are in that unit. They don't have L&D, they don't have any L&D background. And there's a group of, say, 200 people that are in the head office, and that's really one-on-one. So if you look in general, to come back to your question about remote working in the Netherlands, I feel that the bigger corporations have stayed into remote working. So people get onboarded remotely as well. If you look at the organization that I am currently at, it's so small, and they expect people to come into the office for at least 2 or 3 days a week. So if you look at after COVID, companies have adopted very different remote strategies, and their onboarding is very often, a resemblance of that. Yeah.
That's really
But
interesting.
if I look at my own, because every time I go to a new client, I have my own onboarding as well, right? And I always joke about it a little bit, saying I'm sort of now an Olympic player when it comes to being onboarded, because I'm not getting paid to spend a lot of time getting to know the organization. And so what I've learned over time is that I have to filter what I need to know to get the job done that I was hired to do, and what is irrelevant for me. So it can really be the case that I don't know about a whole department, and then after 6 months they go, but we also have that department. It's like, right, all right, yeah, no, yeah, I need to dive into that now. So I sort of learn what's relevant in the moment, and then of course I try to get a little bit of a bigger picture of the organization. But I think that helps me to get up to speed quicker. Usually I aim for a month. So I say to a client, if I'm not up to speed after a month, then we're in trouble.
Then we need to reprioritize things.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Gosh, I was just thinking about, my own onboarding experience for my current company, because this is the first company where I've onboarded remotely. And there were some things that I really enjoyed about it, and other things that I was like, huh, I probably need to remember this so that when I create the onboarding program, people don't feel the way I did.
Yes, yeah. Well, there's actually there's a great article that's called "The Stages of Concern." It's from a Dutch L&D consultancy organization called Kessels and Smith. I'm sure we can find a link, and that sort of describes, from the top of my head, 5 stages that people go through when they enter a new job, and their concern changes. So the first concern that they have really is, am I in the right place? That's the first concern that they have. Am I in the right place? The second thing is, am I doing the task that I was given right? So that really comes after that first bit, like we've discussed in the beginning. And then they sort of come into this survival mode in the beginning, where they only can think about themselves. It's very interesting. So people come into a new job, they don't think about colleagues or teams or departments. They think about, what am I doing here? Am I in the right place? What task do I need to do? And then the third concern is the people around them. So they go, oh, but who do I need to talk to make sure that, I get my work done? So I thought that might be an interesting article for people to read, but also to understand and empathize with that first feeling of, what am I doing here, and being overloaded. I remember when I was onboarding at the consultancy organization, which was huge, and I didn't know what I was getting into. It was my second job, and we all got this like lease car from the organization. So if you talk about onboarding, it's not about only about the content and the tasks, right? So, and we drove with this big bus to this industrial area, and there were like 25 cars, and I will never forget, the license plate were on alphabetical order. So we came out of this bus, and there were all these cars lining up, and I thought, if this is one group getting onboarded and we all get a car with license plates on alphabetical order, how big is this organization really? And how on earth am I gonna, understand the ropes? I thought that was terrifying. Yeah. And if someone would have just told me, listen, we work in business units and you have, a specific group of expertise that you're going to be part of, don't worry about it. I would have felt way more at ease.
Yeah. You do bring up a really interesting point about, psychological safety with onboarding, because, something that I've run into a lot is people are afraid to ask questions because they don't want to look incompetent or like they don't know what they're talking about. And I tell them, well, you don't know what you're talking about. That's why you're here. It's fine.
Mm.
It's up to your leaders and it's up to y'all to create that environment of trust to where you feel safe asking a question, no matter you know how what no matter what the question is and no matter when you're asking the question. And then it's up to your leaders to respond in a kind manner to get you the information that you need to get the job done in that moment, right? And one of the things that I really respected about my leader is, I had a question for her that was in my mind super basic, like I should have known about it in my mind on day 3, and I was asking her about it on day 30. And so I was trying to practice what I preach and approach my leader, and she was like, oh yeah, this is the answer, and then that was it. So in my mind
Yeah.
I just kind of created this whole thing up in my mind, and I do that a lot. That's just me though.
You make it bigger because you think it's a big thing. Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
think a psychological safety and the insecurity in the beginning of a job is different for men than it is for women?
absolutely. Yeah,
How?
absolutely. I At least for women in America, um, yeah, we're gonna go into DEI a little bit here.
Mm.
So within, how do I want to talk about this?
There are a lot of abbreviations around this. You mean diversity and inclusion, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
diversity.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 We can go into that. That's fine. It's a hot topic right now,
it
right?
is. It is.
Yeah.
So I'll speak from my personal experience, and hopefully, if there's someone out there listening, who feels the same way, I'd love to hear about it. But in my experience, I came from a background where, in my family, I was always encouraged to speak my mind, to speak candidly, to take up space. But in school, I was taught the opposite. I was taught that women should be, small. We should be modest. We should not take up space. And I internalized a lot of those things into adulthood. And it wasn't until I went to college and I got exposed to a lot of people who didn't come from a background that I came from, where I realized, oh, you know what? I actually can take up space. I actually do have something to say. And if I falter, if I make a mistake, that's fine. That's how you learn and that's how you grow. And so when I started going into my first job, I had a lot of confidence issues because I came from having to fight to have my voice heard. And even within myself, like there was a lot of fight to even speak up, because I speak 2 languages, and one of the things that I'm always super conscious about is, um, am I saying what I actually mean?
Mm.
And so you add that layer into what it is to be a woman, what it is to be, a woman of color in the United States. And I'm half Mexican, half white, since I don't know if people are
Hmm.
going to be able to see me here. But but there is that aspect of, intersectionality is what we call it here in the United States. Is what do you bring to the table as a woman? What do you bring to the table as a person of color? What do you bring to the table with your heritage, or with your
Mm.
socioeconomic position? All of these things. And I went to a college that is predominantly white cisgender male.
Mm.
There's so much confidence and a little bit of inflated confidence in there. And I can't remember where I read this, but I read somewhere that women feel that they have to qualify for 80 to 100% of the job description to apply, whereas a man feels like if he's got 40 to 60%, he's a shoe in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do think psychological safety shows up in the business because you've got that level of confidence, misplaced or well placed, who knows. But I think that confidence shows up more in men than it does in women. Now, of course, there are women out there who buck the system, and power to them, and I'm going to absolutely try my best to emulate them. But I think that's kind of how it is here, at least for me.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm sorry to hear that there has been a time, especially in school when you're that young, that you're constrained like that. I think there's many answers to this one. I'll get it back to corporate learning in a sec. I think in the Netherlands, we're all brought up in a way that we can have a voice, no matter the gender. I think it's not the same everywhere, but I think in general it's like that. There is, however, a lot of masculinity in general, a lot of toxic masculinity as well. And there has been a lot of, not necessarily in school, but in organizations and in corporate settings where I was this like smart, eager girl that wanted to, I'm the one that's sitting front row and raising my hand. My daughter is 5, she does the same. And then you're sort of, if you come into a corporate world, you're sort of seen as like this smart ass, because you either know the answer or you ask a question so that you know the answer. And there was one, and so I'm not only looking at it from an onboarding point of view, because yes, when you're onboarding, um, um, I was always the girl still in front of the row and raising my hand, wanting wanting a question answered, not always accepted by the leaders that I then encountered. So if I look at my onboarding experience and masculinity in that sense, it's more what sort of leaders have I encountered and how have they given me the feeling of giving me that space or not. So there was one guy in a corporate environment that was very hierarchical and very non-acceptant of, I think, women in general, but especially women who challenge. And so for me, I am brought up, I've been taught it's okay to challenge by my parents in schools. And, because that's how we learn. That's sort of like the paradigm that we live under. And so I distinctly remember that I said in this conversation, I said, but I just want to, and this was, if you talk about bilingual, this was a job that was completely English. And of course, my native language is Dutch. And very often I know the word, not, there's some nuance in which I make a mistake. So what happened was we were in a meeting and he said, why are you constantly like challenging me? And I remember saying, well, I just want to spar a little bit. But but sparring in English has nothing to do with boxing.
Right.
It's literally just tossing ideas around and then seeing who has a great idea, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but he thought I wanted to fight him, like literally. So I said to him, "We're just sparring a little bit," and so he got very like upset with me. I also, to be fair, I left the company because of his attitude and the fact that I didn't get any space to thrive. And that started already in the onboarding. I knew it was a good company that I wanted to work for. I thought the team was brilliant, but the leader just basically couldn't accept someone in his team would do that. And I knew that in week one,
Wow.
based on his behavior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting looking back on it. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I feel like you and I could talk so much more about this particular topic. 'Cause there's
Yeah.
so much to bring to the table about, who what how women show up in the workplace, and what do we bring with us that we don't realize might be baggage, or what, and how does that impact our work. um yeah, like I feel like there could be like a whole other episode about,
Yeah.
in terms of onboarding, how do you what do you bring to the table? Is it baggage, or is it skills? Is it a combination of both? And then how does that impact your onboarding experience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the conversation that we've just had, what I feel is what we talked about is how whatever background you bring, right?
Yeah.
Wherever you come from, you need to make sure that people come in and feel safe,
Yes.
that they feel wanted, that they
Yes.
understand how the culture works, so that they can do some sort of due diligence of, do I belong here or not? And if I don't belong here, is that okay too?
Mm-hmm.
Or they can come in to challenge the status quo. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Um, and then we're saying, you need to equip them the right way to make sure that they also at some point get up to speed and contribute to the organization. It's not only the psychological safety, but it's also the making sure that you do a contribution to the organization. What do you take from this?
I think another element to this is when you're onboarding someone in terms of psychological safety, do they feel tolerated or do they feel accepted? Because I think if they feel one way versus the other, I think that kind of um, it changes the direction in which someone might go. Because if you feel accepted, then you probably feel a little braver and can probably challenge the status quo a little bit more successful.
Yeah, I think you have to have. I know there's a level of psychological safety. I can't sum it up right now, but I know there is.
Yeah.
And the first level is that you feel accepted, and then I think there is some level above it, and the final level is that you feel the freedom to actually challenge the current status quo, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the levels correctly, but I do know that it goes up to a certain point to be able to do that. And first, you have to just feel it's okay to be here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh gosh, yeah. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I feel like you and I could talk way more about this. But yeah. Yeah, this was so fun. Thank you so much for talking with me, and I hope this is not our last conversation together.
Definitely not. No, we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
Hopefully, have a conversation like this again.
for sure.
Maybe go into the D&I even more.
Yes, that'd be fun.
And thanks. Yeah, thanks so much. It was very interesting for me to see both your educational as well as your L&D background and see how that was. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course, of course. Happy to share, and yeah, this has just been fantastic.
If you're a regular listener, you may know that I'm in the studio when we record the podcast to make sure that things work and to remind the speakers when we get near time. I was so engaged in this conversation, I forgot to tell them. And that's why this podcast is slightly longer than usual. We'd love your feedback on this one. Is there demand for more on this topic? I know Dolores and Henrietta will be up for recording more. Please do let us know. A massive thank you to them for their time and contribution. And you can find all their details in the show notes, along with links to some of the things that they've spoken about. Make sure that you mention Women Talking About Learning when you connect with them. It's incredibly satisfying for our guests to know that people have been listening. We're recording again in September, and if you're interested in being on the podcast, please do let us know. How to connect with us, our email, and how to donate to the show are also in the notes. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode of Women Talking About Learning, and next time, it's the belonging one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.